I think we have to try to keep to our time schedule of 11:30. And hopefully we can get to everything. If we don't get to everything, we're obviously going to have to agree to schedule another workshop. So let's get started. Bill, do you want to start with agenda item number 2, the voluntary distance learning options?
Sure, I'll set this up quickly and hand it then to Ken, Patty, and Laura. For weeks and weeks, we've been working on the voluntary distance learning issue, really, frankly, since the state handed it to us in July. A lot of comparisons and work across districts, not just in Fairfield County, but statewide, because it's the right thing for the state to have done to give family the options to be fully remote for any kinds of personal reasons. But it is a real challenge. In the summer, we looked at the possibility of dedicated teachers, and that just was beyond financially what could occur. And in this area, which is, some of the wealthiest districts in the state, only 2 districts have done that so far, Fairfield and Greenwich, and Wilton a wee bit as they've made that shift. So we went down the path of blending in our voluntary distance learning students in all grades. As we're now into this, we're finding, as anticipated, this is one of our most challenging areas. Some of our teachers are doing a great job handling the blend. Others, it's a challenge. And again, this is true district to district to district. Interestingly, even in Fairfield and Greenwich with dedicated classrooms, the parents are organized and being very much activists for, we're not in school, we need the same thing that's in school. So this is statewide, healthy challenge, shall I put in a positive way. And so here we are now. We've made the commitment to go K-5 full return, as we announced Friday. Thank you, board, for working through that with us. But the voluntary distance learning design is still a question. We feel good about 6th to 12th grade, so we're not discussing 6th through 12th grade. The blending has worked relatively well for those older students. The challenge is K-5. And so Ken, since Thursday, but let me be clear, we've been working on these issues going all the way back to July 23rd or 22nd, which was when the state gave us this required design, but intensive work since Thursday on top of all that by Ken, Laura, Patty, working with teachers, SILs, all the rest on what's possible. And they have before you a very detailed set of 3 options. They do have a lead recommendation here, which they'll express to you, but they want to have you see all 3 options as they're listed out here. The task force had a look at this yesterday. The board chair and vice chair had a look at it earlier yesterday. So now it's a good opportunity for you as a board to grapple with it. So let me turn it over to Ken, Laura, and Patty, and they'll guide us through this. They'll manage when we have discussion versus them presenting. I'll leave that to them. And at the end of the day here, not the end of today, as we move along here, we just want to keep an eye on the decision timeline and which of these options requires the superintendent decision versus a board decision. That's going to be critical so we can keep moving. So Ken, Laura, Patty.
Thanks, Bill. Good morning, everyone. I thought that in detailing the options and having the discussion, it'd be helpful to share the document that's posted on the CABE website. So Dan, if you can give me sharing rights here, I'd appreciate that. In just a moment, I'll share the document and go into it.
Okay, it's been opened up. You can share now.
Okay.
Ken, I just want to say thank you to you and the principals for getting this document uploaded to us so we could take a look at it before today's meeting. It really helps just pinpoint the specific details that we're faced with. Just wanted to say thank you.
Yes, and I just give me one moment to pull it up. Okay. Can you see that? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as we detailed yesterday in the task force, I'm going to go over first of what the 3 options are, and then we'll get into the comparison of the options. And for those board members who have already heard this, I apologize. I will start from scratch because I know others have not necessarily gone through this, and then for the community as well, I think it's important to go through in detail. So, from left to right, we shared the options in terms of the first one being less time in school. It's an early dismissal, full return. And what we mean by full return, that all in-person students will be in daily, and the early dismissal would be similar to where we are now at 1:15. There is the possibility, in speaking after yesterday's task force meeting with Laura and Patty, that the early dismissal could be anywhere from 1:15 to 1:30, 1:40, somewhere in there. Could not be any later than that, because we bump up against the middle school bus runs. You got to have at least 50 minutes between those bus runs. But just to give you a sense, so that's the time frame for a full return. VDL students would be coming into those classes, all the classes that the elementary schools would offer. That's the reading, writing, math classes, which in a early dismissal scenario are shortened. We do focus in on the core classes during an early dismissal time slot, but VDL students would be fully integrated into those classes during that time. And in the afternoon, after students leave, there would be the check-ins as we currently have them with the teacher, either individually or in small group, however works best with the teacher scheduling those. Now, it's a little bit of a misnomer that it's an early dismissal from an instructional standpoint, because what we would add here with the full return early dismissal is there would be some asynchronous work for all students after the bell. And that means that there could be some math electronic platform practice work they do with either a Dreambox or an extra math or some other assignment. And that is to maintain the integrity of a full day's worth of learning, so to speak. So that's in essence the full return with an early dismissal. Now, as you imagine the full return with a schedule of 8:30 to 3:15, a typical school day, option 2, this would follow a really a typical Hurlbut and WIS schedule in terms of classes, in terms of reading, writing, math, workshop. Those classes would have their full amount of time. All students who are in person would be in class daily, and VDL students would come into the class remotely. Now, there is a big shift here in how the VDL students come into the class with both option 1 and option 2. It is no longer a window into the classroom. I think a better analogy is that it's a doorway that's wide open into the classroom, that students will be able to come in and interact more with their teacher, with the students in the class. We know that interactions, even for the in-person students, are different than they usually are because they're wearing masks and there is social distancing. So we don't group kids in groups of 3 or 4 within the classroom. But there is going to be that interaction where VDL students can speak up, ask questions. They can be called on by a teacher. They can participate. And at appropriate times, a student, a VDL student, may be told, at this point in the class, what makes sense is you go back through that door and you're going to work asynchronously, because we are conscious. We have heard the concerns from VDL parents, and actually all parents, about screen time. And there'll be times where, even though the camera could be on, the students can go off and do some work and then return as they would normally in the classroom. So a full return is meant to be fully integrating students in the class. Then option 3 is is a full return for in-person students daily, and it's a separate dedicated teacher for VDL students. And so let me spend a little time on this because I just want to make sure everybody understands where the VDL teachers are coming from, what happens to the in-person students who were in those teachers' classes, and how it would work. So we would need, by looking at the current numbers of VDL students, we would need 7 teachers to cover the total population of K-5 VDL students. And in this document, if you pull it from the CABE website, you'll see down below, there's a chart of the numbers by grade. And in some grades, for example, grade 1, we have more than a classroom worth of VDL students. Same thing in, I believe it's grade 4. We have more students in that grade, and actually in grade 5 as well. So if you're thinking of our typical class sizes, so there would be some classes where, for example, you'd have a dedicated grade 1 class, a grade 3, a grade 4, and a grade 5 class. But you'd also have some classes where, because of the numbers, you'd have a group that's K1, mostly kindergarten students, some first grade students. You'd have another group that's grades 1 and 2 in that VDL class. You'd also have a grade 4-5 class, and principals would need to make a determination as to how those class rosters would be generated. And in total, there'd be 3 VDL teachers with this model from Hurlbut, 4 VDL teachers from WIS, and they would be pulled from the existing resources of classroom teachers within the grades. So for example, in 5th grade, we have 8 sections. There'd be at least 1 teacher who would be shifted to becoming a VDL teacher, would have those students create a community with anywhere from 20 to 24 students in that class, all remote. But that teacher's in-person students, and there may have been, let's say 20 students within that class, they would need to be redistributed, regrouped into the remaining 7 classes. So just want to, make sure we all understand that we'd have to reshuffle essentially all of the class rosters in each grade. And so there would be an impact. Students who are in person who may have had a 5th grade teacher may get a new 5th grade teacher as a result. So they're obviously trade-offs, there are pros and cons with all of these options. But that should give you a sense of how we are pulling the VDL teachers to dedicate those resources. Now with full return, there is a benefit for teachers. They can just focus on their in-person students. So that's one of the advantages of that model, which probably is now a good segue to, looking, just considering the thinking that went into the recommendation. The recommendation, Patty, Laura, Dan, DeVito, Tracy, and I, we've had ongoing conversations that have ramped up significantly. We've really looked at the feedback too. I mean, there's a lot of feedback from VDL families, in-person families, and our teachers. We've heard the feedback from VDL parents that many are interested in having a dedicated teacher, why they think that's a benefit, that their children would get more focused attention. We've heard that. We've also heard from other families who have said, the full day, they think that's a long period of time. They think that an early dismissal option may be better for them. It may be, less exposure during the course of a day. We've also heard from teachers. Teachers have said, in some, specifically in grades 2 through 5. Keep the hybrid. Keep the hybrid. And, you know, so we have been listening, we've been weighing all that feedback, and we've been, you know, really coming to a determination that the two most viable options for us are option 2 and option 1, with the recommendation today in front of you of a full return option 2. And so I can go into that recommendation, and if you heard me talk about the option 3, where we're pulling teachers from within the grades to dedicate, the VDL teachers, it's a disruptive option in many ways. We would have to regroup many in-person students, and those students would get a new teacher. They'd get a new teacher after having established a relationship at this point in the year. So there are several special education implications as well from that regrouping, which Tracy Edwards can speak to as well. So for that reason, and we're not in a position to be able to have 7 new hire VDL teachers to cover that. We look within first. We always look within our existing resources, and with that approach, it would be too disruptive. So then, we're coming to option 1 versus option 2. Certainly, one of the advantages of the full return is you get a more typical schedule that we are used to at Hurlbut and Wyss. We get a full day of learning. The readers, writers, math workshops are full workshop periods, and so since we are at a time where we're able to come in full in, this option allows us to fully take advantage of the ability to do so and to get in as much instructional time as possible. Now, with the early dismissal, there is certainly an advantage of, our VDL students could still have that dedicated time in the afternoon, but that is at the expense of that full day of learning in terms of being in person for the full day. We did say we do some asynchronous work to build on that. But I think really where we now see both option 1 and option 2, and where we're moving with the synchronous learning, it's not a window into the classroom anymore. It's more of a doorway in and being fully involved in that class. And many of our teachers have been navigating that. We know there's work to do there, and that's where our professional development will continue to focus, the sharing of ideas, and be able to better facilitate interactive learning for VDL students. So that's and I just maybe give a moment for Laura and Patty if I've missed anything that you want to add. But this document, it lists out pros and cons, which I'll leave up here, but just for everyone to see, it does go into various aspects, elements of each of the models. We even talk about screen time. We do recognize screen time with any model is of concern. All students, whether they're in person or VDL, are spending more time on screens. We are looking at as much as possible, when there are opportunities for students to be learning but not be on a screen, we're trying to promote that. But then you can see here we're really looking at all aspects of the day, and you can pull this document and look at it on your own. So Patty and Laura, is there anything before questions that you'd like to add?
The only thing that we didn't put in there, I mean, I think it's really comprehensive. You know, the pros and the cons for both are really big. And this is such a hard decision. The one thing that actually Laura and I were just calculating is that if we ended up dedicating a teacher and pulling, I would need to pull 2 of my 5th grade teachers. It would mean my other 5th grade classes go into 20 and 24 and 25. Just because of the way it breaks down. The other 2 grades would be, but so those classes rooms are becoming very big of the in-person. So now you're putting more kids in the classrooms for 7.5 hours, which I don't think we included in this. We didn't think about that. So
the same thing would happen in our 2nd grades in particular, you know, depending on, and this is one of the challenges with the VDL program, is that it is fluid. You know, families move into VDL at times and also out. So it's a little bit of a moving target to try to figure out how many students are in and out and what the impact is then on the class sizes. But given the current numbers, if we had to pull a 2nd grade teacher, the remaining in-person classes would be at 23, 24, which is quite large. And we're already going to be at 3 feet social distancing. We would definitely dip below that if we had to do that. Certainly, you know, I think this document is very comprehensive, looking at all the pros and cons. There's no perfect model this year, you know, and it's really just weighing, you know, what's best for everybody. I do think at both schools, our teachers have become much more adept at balancing the needs of the students who are Zooming in and the students within the classroom. There's certainly more work to be done with that, and will be a little bit more of a learning curve when the teachers now have full classes in front of them, in addition to the students at home. But we've both been very impressed by what we've seen so far this year. It's a very different way of teaching that our teachers have had to learn this year, and every day we see amazing things happening in the classroom. So whatever model we go with, you know, we will implement it to the best of our ability.
and I would concur with Laura. I mean, our teachers have gone from getting all of our students online for morning meetings and read alouds to really integrating them, our virtual distance learners, into the classroom for all academic subject areas. I mean, I think that's our goal. They've always wanted to make sure that everybody is fully included into the classroom environment. And I think that no matter what the decision is, obviously we will work toward making that the best experience for all students, whether they're in person or they're at home.
So Tony, I don't know.
So you're okay. I think we should open up with questions. I have one. I think a full return with a synchronous component, the way you describe it, a doorway into the classroom, is ideal, right? You absolutely, it solves a lot of issues. If we go back to full distance learning, it's easier to implement. If we have quarantined students, it's easier to implement. But this is a goal to perfect this, right? To make it better and better every day. But we know, and we've heard from the parents of our younger students that chose voluntary distance learning that struggled. There's a number of students that struggled. My concern is, while this is getting better and better, maybe you can talk a little bit about what kind of support we're planning on dedicating to those students who are at home, who are struggling with this, especially in the early days, while this is getting better and better, because it's not going to be perfect. And I want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where parents who are choosing voluntary distance learning are not viewing this as an option of health versus education, right? That we do have two viable options for parents, either full return or voluntary distance learning. Maybe you can touch a little bit on some of the ideas that you have in terms of specifics of how we're intending to support some of those students who are struggling in the voluntary distance learning format.
Great. Good question, Tony. And I will start, and Patty and Laura can chime in. We've looked at a variety of supports. I mean, one of the things we know is we do have a structure in place in our system that does, if we do have students who we find are needing extra support in reading or math, we have structures in place with reading and math intervention and processes where you would identify students and get them that appropriate early intervention support as soon as possible. Obviously, beyond that, with special education, we do have supports there that follows a very specific process. And those special ed teachers meet at a separate schedule with students. But then we've talked about those students who may not necessarily fall into those categories and need other supports. We have looked at models where, well, could you have a dedicated VDL support teacher at Hurlbut or support teacher at WIS? And we've looked at that. Could that be helpful? We haven't completely ruled that out, but the reality is, you're talking, you could have 75 students in each of those buildings who are VDL students, and then logistically, how do you arrange that? But that would be one way to approach that. But making that actually work in reality, that's a challenge in finding those times because those VDL students will be, just like in-person students, scheduled throughout the day, and there will be work that they'll be doing with the class. There'll be things they'll be doing on their own. So that's sort of a general. Obviously, the early dismissal has the check-ins at the end of the day as an added advantage.
No, I'm not. I think option 1, 2, or 3. I'm not talking about specifics. I'm not pointing at specific options as a solution. What I'm saying is that there are some comments during the week, which is VDL students are only 5% or 10% or 11% or 20%, and I quite frankly don't care if it's 1%. Some of those parents, for health reasons, cannot send their kids in, and they're worried about the quality of the VDL option. And I think they deserve to have specifics about how they're going to be supported. And I think that's only fair, right? And so I'm not pointing to any specific option, but because of the fact that I think that when some parents basically say, I think option 3 is the best, what they're really saying is, I'd like to see how the VDL students might be supported a little bit better than they are today. I mean, and I don't think they're pointing at any specific option, but they're just voicing a concern based on the experience that they've had over the last several months.
Yeah, so maybe if I scroll down, we have thought about how do we better support all students, VDL students, in-person students, with if they're remoting in on how that synchronous instruction would take place, what it would look like. Maybe that would help if we were to highlight that and how we're going to support VDL students. So from an instructional approach, our teachers will be taking sort of the typical workshop approach of an I do, we do, you do model within the class period. So if you take readers and writers workshop, one of the things that would happen now is that the teacher would involve students in a mini lesson. There'd be some guided practice with students interacting with the teacher, including VDL. And then there would be the you do portion of the lesson. So after I do and we do to get students going, there's the you do, where students will be working alongside their classmates, although they'll be remote. they'll be doing that work. They can ask questions during that time if they get stuck or need some support, and then they will come back for the share and the closure, the lesson. So it's mirroring the classroom experience and having them have more interactions with those students. We also want to connect in those VDL students who are at home, so they're connected and can support each other. They're going through similar experience, but also have classmates in the classroom that they're going to be interacting with. So through this document, you can see, how we're going to handle instruction, what the learning environment will look like. We were continuing to work to build a community of learners within the classroom. That's important, and that includes all students, VDL and in person. Laura, Patty, if you want to add to this, I know we spent a lot of time talking about how this would work, and I think from the elementary and intermediate perspective, a lot of similarities, but there could be some nuances.
I think one of the points I wanted to make is I think in some cases there's the perception that the VDL students are an afterthought. And I just want to be clear to everyone that that is certainly not the case at either school nor anywhere in the district. We are always very much thinking about the needs of our VDL students, their experience, how we can improve it, and all of the professional development. Any work that's being done is always looking at how it works for the in-person students as well as the distance learning students, and making sure that they feel included, a part of what's going on, and that they have the tools necessary to learn and grow throughout the year. Ken brought up a good point. I think we have to identify sometimes where the need is when we hear, maybe a student struggling with distance learning. What is that struggle? We certainly have academic supports with our reading and our math teachers. We also have our PPS staff if it's more the social emotional piece. Our school psychologists, school counselors are always available, and I know have been working with many of our VDL families to support them at home.
Yeah, I think the question of support also needs to start with the teacher. So if a family is struggling or a student is struggling, we start so that, as Laura said, where is the support, or where is the need for support? Maybe it could be a technology, it could be just some help with understanding how the day works. So I think we have to start there and then figure out how do we best support the child, because we do want everybody to be successful, and we are very mindful of screen time, but we are also mindful of making everybody feeling included in the classroom too. So it's that balance of when you're on, when you're not on. So it's the same thing in the classroom. Our kids at our level are on screens a lot. So
I have a few questions. Every grade obviously presents its own challenges in terms of what they are capable of with regards to student to teacher dependency rate, and also student to parent dependency rate. I think one of the biggest challenges in Hurlbut, especially for kindergartners and first graders, is their limited reading ability, right? So to be able to navigate, while I love the I do, we do, you do strategy, and it's very easy to comprehend in terms of what I'm responsible for, et cetera, I think it's going to be very difficult for those younger children, like I said, to navigate without being able to read in the you do time frame, right? So I wanted to point out the challenges for the younger grades, but this question is actually applicable to everybody, K through 5, is if synchronous learning is just not doable, whether it be the parents are not able to chaperone to get on and get off, or the parent just feels like it's just way too much screen time. Will synchronous learning, first question, will synchronous learning be mandatory for VDL students? And my second question is, if it is not, will curriculum be provided to the parents to assist them kind of in helping their child without being on the screen, live at all times?
Thank you, Ruby. So one of the things I just want to mention before I answer your question specifically, our K-1 teachers, when I had focus groups with team leaders there and talked to some of those teachers, they were ones who were very positive about coming in full in K-1 and felt very strongly they could very much build on what they have done to have VDL students come into the class and they would be able to support them. The conferring and conferencing that would take place during the workshop where they would get to the various students in their classes, including the VDL students, to provide them with support. They felt comfortable doing that more so than they actually preferred that over, we were talking at the time, the hybrid model and then having the whole rest of the half of your class at home. So I just want you to know there's a real predisposition there in those earliest grades where the reading, obviously they're just learning how to read. But in terms of the model, this is the model that we would be asking our teachers to continue to develop and implement. We would not put on them a separate planning for an asynchronous curriculum for a student. We certainly would differentiate within the class, but we're not looking to run two models simultaneously. And Laura and Patty can add to that. If a student is, if there are concerns, again, we would come back with the classroom teacher and problem solve how we would support that student, but not create a separate, asynchronous pathway where we're just, because then, we lose the connection to the students, the classroom, in part, or even more than that. And was there another part of the question, Ruby, did I miss?
The first one was would it be mandatory, and then the second one was if not, would curriculum be provided? But you answered both of them.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, and I did hear a subtext there because I know it's an issue in other districts of actual materials being provided, hard copy materials to supplement. And that's a question that's come up elsewhere because I do know we have been providing hard copy materials, but
Yeah.
Laura and Patty could speak to the issues here because the K-1 up through 5, by and large, our teachers are excellent at differentiating. And I hope the board hears that real strong K-1 commitment to really address exactly, Ruby, what you're asking. But you might want to speak to the materials question because that has come up in other districts for their equivalent of VDLs.
Laura and Patty, I know we have had a rotation of material, so maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, so at Hurlbut, we have a 2-week cycle where VDL families come pick up some materials and return materials they no longer need. Particularly at the younger levels, when students are learning how to read, they go through reading levels very quickly, and the books are still pretty short in length, so they need a large volume of books to keep them interested and active in the reading process. So we do have a 2-week cycle where VDL families come pick up materials and drop off ones they are completed with, also manipulatives, hands-on, workbooks, many materials for at home. And certainly they do need support at home. Ruby's spot on with that. The youngest learners do need somebody at home helping to guide them. And we're certainly working, closely with those families and are available to support with other questions. I do want to also address the other question that's come up because I have also come across it a few times. The option of what is mandatory. We do need our students to participate for the mini lessons as part of the day. We do have attendance guidelines that the state has put out that we do need to follow. So we do need students that are enrolled with us to be active for certain periods of the day. Certainly at the youngest levels, and I think at any level, students are not expected to be online all day. There are asynchronous times where they, even though, as Ken mentioned, may have this the screen on are working independently or doing work that is not related to the screen. They may be looking for items in their home that start with a certain letter or reading books independently, working on some writing. But we do need the students interacting throughout the day with the teacher. That's also part of the attendance guidelines that we need to follow.
So currently, the children's photo is projected on the screen. If they are now required to be synchronous all day, will their picture be up on the screen for the duration of the day?
No, so the students seeing each other in the classroom from home to in school happens at times. If there's a morning
Okay.
meeting and they're greeting each other, there may be some interaction and they want to say hi to their friends and they get so excited to see, their friends who are maybe learning from home. And I've seen the other end too, with the students at home get so excited to see what's going on in the classroom and they wave, or they're doing a show and tell or sharing a story. And then there are times when the teacher will just have them visible to the teacher. She may be, what we're looking at is maybe the teacher during those times in a small group working with the students who are at home and are only visible back and forth to the teacher. The same thing happens with the special area teachers when they come in the classroom. There may be some interactions just between the teacher and the students at home, and then between the teacher and the students in person. So I just want to be clear that they're not just kind of hanging out there, throughout the day. It's definitely fluid, and there's some students are very comfortable with that, and they're eager to see their friends more often, and the teachers really do differentiate for that as well.
Okay. So if we're getting rid of, or if we're recommending the full day return, and there is no after school contact between VDL and teachers, how are we holding the VDL students accountable? Like when is the time where there are pop quizzes or tests or understanding just the progression of and the understanding of where the VDL students, how they're progressing?
So I can start with that. That will happen, with a full.
Sorry, did you mean just for the younger kids, Ruby?
Yeah, just because it's just the scenario is just K through 5. So, I mean, it could be applicable to obviously the upper grades too, but just if now the teacher, if it's a full day and the teacher does not, have that connection with a VDL student at the end of the day, I'm just wondering when are these children tested? How do we gauge the progress and the learning of these children? When's that time period?
In my mind, those are two different questions. I mean, how you gauge the progress is part of your observation during the day, Laura, right? The teacher that's kind of infused throughout the day is how you observe your children's progress. But I understand. I'd love to hear Laura answer.
So that will happen during the small group time within the classroom. So the teacher, say, for example, during a reading lesson, does a reading mini lesson at the beginning to everybody. Students practice it with the teacher and then they're reading independently. So if a student is in person, the teacher might have a student or two come to the reading table, work with them. The same thing can happen with the remote learners, but they'll be on the screen. So while the students in the classroom are reading independently, the teacher may turn to the screen and privately have some time with the student who's at home. And our assessments are, we don't really call them quizzes, but a teacher may have a book that she wants a student at home to read and can really gauge where the student is with their reading level. We've already done our beginning of the year reading assessments to see where our students are, what skills they're starting the year with. So that has been ongoing, and that will be embedded during the school day. It is a little bit more of a juggle for the classroom teacher to work through that, but with the full day schedule, there's a little more time. And then certainly, as Ken mentioned, we have our reading and our math support staff when needed.
And that would be the same here at the 345, is that, during the day, students are asked to be working independently while teachers are conferencing one-on-one with students. It would be the same for our VDL students. They would be on headphones, the teacher would be, and they would be conferencing back and forth and doing assessments, which we have been doing for the last few weeks. So they've done math assessments and reading assessments, and that would continue.
Guess I might, well, I have a few more questions, but let's get the other board members who have questions to ask them.
I have a question about, I'm not sure if it's for Ken or for Patty, really. My issue are two. One is sort of like the technical issues. And then the other is that I got a sense from some of the VDL parents that those kids sort of felt like they were singled out. So I thought about this from how are you going to address it? It's a little bit easier, I think, probably at the 3 to 5 level. I don't know. But what I was thinking is, have you thought about how you're going to address those two things? Because if you have, the teacher has a microphone at the front of the room and then someone in the back of the room who is wearing a mask and, might be soft-spoken answers a question, well, somebody on the computer, is it going to be able to hear it? And are they just going to sit there and say, like, I don't, they're going to put in the chat, like, what did they say? And that's probably going to go on all day. So what I was thinking is, what if you had everybody sitting there with their laptops so that the kids all were sort of like had a level playing field. And whenever a student answered, it was sort of like how we do a Zoom. Everyone can see everyone, even though they're wearing a mask. I mean, have you given any thought to those two issues?
Patty, I could.
Oh, good, Ken.
First, though, Hillary, just the
Sorry,
two
can I-
issues.
Clarifying question there, Ken, sorry. Did you mean the children who are in person would all be on their computers as well?
That's what I meant, because then it is sort of a level playing field, and then you can at least hear when they're responding to a question. So I couldn't think of another way to do it especially when you're talking with you're talking about little kids, they're soft-spoken, they're far away from the microphone, there's no nonverbal communication. Like, I don't know how else you'd address that.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that, we're trying to reduce the amount of screen time for little kids.
I understand that.
All right, so Hillary, I understand your question to be, some of this is in the more technical on being able to actually, hear the student, and you're offering, you're suggesting a strategy, which, some teachers, have been using just that, where there are times during the class where the whole class will be on their computer, including the VDL student, to facilitate. We've also taken some steps internally, which Dan can speak to, to ensure that students can hear the teacher, teacher can hear the students, to make sure that happens. Because at first, when we first started the year, I mean, that was a really big challenge for us. But the strategy you mentioned is certainly one of them, keeping in mind the screen time. Dan, can you talk about the mics?
Yeah, sure. So we've been reactive with some of the issues in some of the classrooms with installing ambient mics to make sure that the teacher's voice can be heard and gives them a little bit more wiggle room to move around in the front of the class. We've been dealing with those on a case-by-case basis. Those should be installed in most classrooms throughout the district. The classrooms that still don't have them installed, we're just working on the placement of the teacher desks versus if they're in the back of the classroom, we have to run long wiring to get the microphones to the front of the desk. Hillary, I've also spoken to teachers. They've had the similar question with, what if we had multiple students in the classroom with their devices on and they were in the Zoom meeting? What can we do? The biggest problem with that is feedback, because if you have 6 people, 8 people, even 2 people in a room who are in the same Zoom meeting with their microphones on, you're going to hear one of those crazy feedback loops that I'm sure we've all heard in meetings before. So part of that process is to go over the procedure of, if you want to do that, basically everybody has to be muted until it's their time to speak. And then the teacher also has to mute themselves. So only one person at a time can be unmuted. So there is a little bit of a procedure with that, it takes time to get everyone used to the coordination of okay, Dan, it's your turn to speak. I'm going to mute myself. Okay, Ken, it's your turn to speak. Everybody mute themselves. But I do understand what you're saying, where that kind of levels the playing field in terms of everyone being able to be in that kind of a meeting all simultaneously.
So then what are some other, like, how else can we address that then?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the analog version of that is what we, as we've gone in to do observations, we see teachers, they'll repeat what a student says because they, it's a point that maybe the kids in the front of the room couldn't hear. I mean, we have students who are even without masks are so soft spoken. So, or getting them to repeat that, or but the teacher being in tune with the fact that we want everyone to hear, and sometimes even normal circumstances the teacher will repeat something. But ideally, I mean,
Mhm.
kind
You
of
know,
work through that.
Ken, I think that some of this is basic. I think some of the things that everyone is looking for in their questions is I'm going to boil it down maybe to a bit of a basic, which is listening to your customer, right? You had a product out there. There was some problems, some flaws, and people are basically giving you that feedback. And the question is, in this iteration, right, have you taken in all of that feedback, and what have you done to be able to, in this iteration, improve your product, right? I think that's the most basic question that's really being asked in so many different ways, right?
Yeah, and I think, Tony, I think that's spot on. And I also think it can be framed in another way, and we can look at it in both ways, or perhaps, Ken, you can respond to both ways. And that is, if I'm a VDL parent, other than the fact that my child has to be learning remotely, because I've chosen that option. I've chosen for my child to be learning on a computer instead of in person. We know that, and there's nothing you can do to change that. What am I not getting that in-person students are getting? And that I really am trying to piece that out of your chart here. And because this has been a very helpful discussion and a very helpful document, but what am I not, because I think anyone listening is going to say, what am I not getting that the in-person kids are getting, other than the fact that I'm not in person?
Yeah, and Hillary, I mean, excuse me, Taffy, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, you can't, I think even if we have the same schedule, which is what we have now for VDL and in-person students, we have, the opportunities to interact within the classroom. They're have the teacher, they have that classroom community. But even if we have the dedicated, teacher, there's just something about that human interaction. Even if they had a dedicated teacher, that's going to be different than the in-person experience. They're going to still have the social emotional, where the teacher is going to be in tune with their needs, supporting their needs. There is just the very nature of being in person versus remote that we can't get around that. I mean,
yeah, I wasn't implying you could, make it magically just as good as being in person. That's not what I was getting at. I was more that we have to accept that learning from home is not going to be as rich an experience as learning in the classroom. We cannot change the nature of those conditions, except to provide the support. So kids in school in person are getting in-person support. The equivalent for the virtual kids is what, and does it balance out? And if there's some area where they're still being quote unquote shortchanged, not by intentional neglect, but just by circumstances, what is that?
So yeah, all of our support structures that are made available to in-person students are made available to VDL students. And earlier we talked about the PPS, the school counseling, the intervention for the academics. All of that can be done remotely, can be done virtually. there are also going to be things that, we may not anticipate ahead of time that come up, and that we are, small system, personalizing education is important. So we would, from the classroom level and, the building supports would work with that family to help them. Because I mean, that's what we're all about. I mean, it's a community of learners. Everyone and their needs are important, and we use the collective resources of the system to support that. And that's the commitment.
Yeah, and I think Taffy, having Laura and Patty speak to this some, because I get very much Tony's point. We're also only 5 weeks of delivering this product, and we're making adjustments as we go.
Yep.
And the materials piece I raised is very important, because one of the two districts that has a dedicated teacher, materials are getting handed out Wednesday to those children. So that's gigantic. We've avoided that. So we have to do better. I don't want lost in this discussion what we've already been really working hard to do. And I think, and again, Patty, Laura, really speak to this, that lead recommendation is to up the in-school time, because that's going to, and remember what the K1 teacher said. K1 teacher said, full return, give us that much more time, because we can then do all those things we're really good at in Weston, just with more time now to know how to do it. And the synchronous page is really critical to then provide that extra intensive support. But I think Patty and Laura, if you could speak to, because there's really good questions coming from Taffy tied to Tony's question about, hey, you're into this, you're getting criticism, that's fine. Frankly, I embrace the criticism. Now here's what we're thinking about how to make this even better.
I
So
guess,
all of our students have access to any supports they may need, whether they're in school or in person. As Ken said, it is a different experience, and I think we have to acknowledge that and embrace it. If a student needs any kind of supports, there's nothing we're shortchanging them on. Certainly, we're happy when parents reach out to us and say, my child needs a little, more support in reading, or a little more support in math, or struggling in this area, or feeling included. When we know that, we can really address it. But I can't think of any area that we're saying, oh, because you're VDL, you don't get, X, Y, or Z. We're certainly not doing that, nor have we from the beginning. Sorry.
I think I'm the same place. I've been thinking as you asked the question, Tabby, I'm thinking, like, what are we not providing our students? Like, what support is happening in school that's not happening? I mean, during the day, when after they do the mini lesson and the kids are working independently, the teachers are checking in, are you okay? And just sort of, they would like be in the classroom. So I guess I think that our teachers are trying to give everybody support. So
that's what I wanted. I think that's what we want to hear, is that, the VDL students are by definition going to have a more challenging experience because they're on a computer at home, period. And we wish as a board and an administration that we could wave a magic wand and make that not so, but we can't do it. So we have to do the very, very best we can in providing all the supports we can. So unless I hear you say, no, we just don't have time to support the VDL kids, then I think I didn't hear that. I'm hearing we are providing the supports, but Ruby, you're a real world experience parent here, and so feel free to push back. But this is kind of where, and I know we have a big agenda, so I kind of wanted to get down to this full return option. I'm comparing the columns, and I'm saying this looks like an equitable and high quality option under the circumstances. And I'm just wondering if there's anything missing. Let's raise it now and fix it. And
Taffy, could I pick up on that connections? Because the team's doing a great job here. I'm intentionally listening. But fundamental to us as educators, and what's worked so wonderfully in Weston since I arrived, and it predates me by forever, is the sense of connections. That we are great at making connections teacher to student. And with more time in the day, our teachers are telling us we have a better shot at connections and doing better for the VDLs. And there's that commitment. The big problem of option 3 is we potentially undermine connections for a large number of our students. And that's why that's not a lead recommendation coming to you from Laura and Patty and Ken and Tracy, who's very strong on this issue of that potential breaking of connections. We hear what the VDL parents want for that option 3. My concern as an educator is that issue of connections and support that is you're asking as a board, which is the exact right question, we put that at risk for almost all of our K-5ers. If we are at the 5th or 6th week going to take a large number of them and say, you now have a different teacher. Be an educator or parent, think about that teacher-student connection and how vital that is. And we have to, in this tumultuous time, we've got to do all we can to keep that and protect it, not shift it or put it at risk.
Completely agree, Bill. I think the option 3 is extremely disruptive for little children. I think it's just the wrong road. But the question I ask is, how can we be creative about after school time with high school kids checking in on little kids? Everybody gets a buddy. I know this sounds completely primitive, but how can we provide that kind of creative support? And I'm not suggesting, Patty and Laura, that you spend any time thinking about this today, but I'm throwing it out as a, creative option. You've got high school kids who are all working with little kids after school to connect and see if they need any help with anything. And that's completely absurd, I realize, but I want us to be open to, if the supports and the teacher, limitations on their time are real, how can we be creative about other supports? And we don't need to talk about it any further today. It was just, I'm throwing it out there.
I just wanted to, I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to offer maybe some comments and reflections. I mean, if anything, there's no shortage of feedback, and which is good. But one thing that as I think about this process is that I've learned, and I hope other people have learned, is the nuanced complexities of logistics, right? So I've really gotten to appreciate that. And I think it's important to, the way I approach this is that, and I'm aligning with a lot of what the administration is saying, is we have a model that we should improve, right? I think that introducing, other models right now is probably dilutive to our goals. So, and I also think that by, by what's being recommended, it also increases the fluidity as we have to shift along. And that's something that the nuance that shouldn't be missed. So in summary, I'm very supportive. I guess we need to be razor sharp focused on the technology aspect of it, because that's the bridge to the student. But I think honing in on the relationship of the teachers and doing that is the right thing. So no question, but just those are my reflections.
I would like to just chime in. I think this has been a very well thought out document with a lot of the details that are incredibly beneficial to the board and to our families. The one thing I would like for us to just highlight a little bit, the success of delivering the Western education model is, dependent upon the success of each individual teacher, support staff, et cetera, that are in our classrooms. What are we going to be doing to cultivate best practices from the staff who are really rocking this new model to support the staff who need extra support? I mean, in any situation, you're going to have people who naturally are more successful in a certain environment than others. How can we pull on the strengths of the ones who are naturally managing this situation to help support the teachers and other staff members who need a little extra support to get them there? I mean, we've dealt with this when we've just introduced Chromebooks into a classroom. Some teachers fully implement, others are a little reticent. So how are we going to be actively supporting our staff as the evolution of this form of education continues?
So I can, Ken, do you want to start, or?
Just very briefly, Laura, then I'll let you, just from a professional learning standpoint, I mean, that's really one of the silver linings here, is that teachers, while this is extremely stressful, challenging, making all these shifts since going back to last March, they are growing and learning at a rate that is incredible. And the innovation and creativity, as you mentioned, of some teachers needs to be shared. We, our SILs are promoting that with those teacher leaders to collaborate, but we need the time to do that. And so we're very fortunate. We had yesterday as a full day. We have election day as a full day. We've built in next week. There's an early release on that Wednesday. And we'll just need the flexibility to add periodically those additional early releases so that the teachers can keep sharing and front load that. So, while, November does have, conference days and there's some early releases for that, I mean, we just need to be comfortable and understand the fact that there may need to be another early release somewhere else, in that time period so that teachers can have that collaboration. But going back to our full day also does help us. We, at the elementary level, and Laura, you can correct me, I don't think we had all our full complement of common meeting times in the schedule. And so that is a benefit for us going back full. Sorry, Laura.
Yeah, that's, I was going to start with what Ken said. There's a lot of professional development that's happening. Yesterday was a great example of, the collaboration throughout the day within teams, across teams. We have a highly collaborative staff. I know Patty does too. The team leaders really play an important role in that. I know that's sometimes a question that comes up is the role of the team leaders. They're really helping coordinate and share best practices across their teams and between teams within the building. Second grade may have found a really creative way to do something for foundations, and then they'll share it across to the kindergarten and first grade team leaders, and then that gets disseminated out. Our CILs also play an important role to support teachers and to share best practices across the building and then between the buildings. Our CILs are, one of them is shared across the buildings, and there's a lot of conversation and coordination that goes across between Hurlbut and WIS.
Does it make sense, Ken? I know you mentioned like there may be a need for, additional early dismissals. Does it make sense to kind of go ahead and plan those into a calendar so staff and families know? I mean, I know we have a few coming up, but I mean, is this the type of thing where it needs to be like, an every other Wednesday afternoon, a once a month Wednesday afternoon? Like, I think part of the challenge of our first 5 weeks of school, I think for staff and for families, has been the continually rotating schedule, just trying to plan, for childcare and plan for, when you can, take your child to the doctor, not have them miss like what portion of class they're getting. Is there enough known about your needs that, some sort of schedule be put in place with the caveat that if we run up against something that needs to be dealt with, we all know we need to be flexible in this year, but does it make sense to consider some sort of built-in schedule?
Absolutely, Gina. And I think between now and the end of the calendar year, we can do that. And, we also already on the calendar, we have a day in December. In the previous meeting, we had a recommendation for a date in November. We can certainly, solidify that calendar between now and the end of December, and get that out to families.
The teachers, all of the staff really appreciates the professional learning time. It really is a key piece for them. I know some districts who moved to full opening added more days in. It's certainly time well spent from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think yesterday was especially helpful. I mean, not only our CILs and our team leaders, but our tech integrators. Jane Sabini ran individual grade level meetings and really worked with the teams where they are and where each team needs to be. So continuing, and I think your comment before about how we continually are striving to get better, and as issues come up, I think that gives us that opportunity to get that time to address just in time issues and concerns.
I think, Taffy, when you said, whether we talk about those creative options of support here or elsewhere, I think that's what, for maybe my comfort level and that's what needs to happen to get a bit more comfort with the option 2. Here are my concerns with option 2. The teachers are going to be required to be extreme multitaskers from 8:30 a.m. until 3:15, right? For the entire duration. Whereas now they're kind of multitasking, kind of off and on throughout the day. So I'm worried for the teachers in that perspective. I'm worried about the children sitting in the classroom just because of the amount of disruption that they're going to face throughout the entire day, whether it be looking at children on the screen, whether it be technical issues, glitches, pulling the teacher away, or even possibly not being able to focus even with headphones on because the teacher is speaking to the screen and is speaking at home to those children. So I'm worried about the children in the classroom. And then the third, I'm worried about the VDL students at home. Just again, the level of support that they need, right? The one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to make a parent choose between health, safety, and education. And if we're not offering that extra level of creative support, we kind of are having them make that choice. So that's kind of my thought on how I feel and my concerns about option 2. I guess now my question is related to how are we utilizing the teachers that are at home right now? Can we if it's not a designated VDL teacher, is there any level of support, maybe it be just a couple hours a day with a dedicated current staff member that just specifically focuses on VDL students?
Thanks, Ruby. And we want to address each of those groups and continue to support them as you highlighted. So in terms of, I'll take the last thing you said first, the teachers who may be on leave. I want to make sure we understand that we have very few teachers on leave and even fewer. In fact, all the teachers on leave, I probably on one hand could count, and even fewer are the number who have elementary certification. If a teacher was cleared to come back to work, there could be some opportunities in talking with Laura and Patty. We'd look at those, but if a smaller subset of students need some support that our structure doesn't currently provide outside of the school day, we look at that. Recognizing we have about 75 kids, in each building who are VDL students. So, we can think creatively. We will think creatively. We're going to look at that, and see what we can.
Yeah.
What we can do.
Yeah, Ken, I think Ruby's question was spot on. I think that's something that you should give some serious thought as you are filling in the details, because, as Victor said, this is a real logistical challenge. It's not lost on everyone. And I think that with every logistical challenge, it gets better every day. But along the way, it's just practical. It's just realistic to realize that there will be a set of students, whether they're technical challenges, whether whatever that challenge may be. Maybe they need some extra support in one way or another. I think you just have to come to that, that realization that that's just going to happen in the early days. And I think that thinking about how that's going to be addressed in a creative way is something that I would suggest that you spend some time on, because it's just going to help the teachers, and it's going to help those students and parents who are at home. That was my, that was my concern going into it. It's not that option 2 isn't the ideal. It's just that until you get there, you have to realize that there will be bumps in the road and that there has to be some sort of support structure that helps get through that while this gets to the point where it's really good, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Tony. And you know, I know we've all spent a lot of time talking and thinking about the VDL kids and these proposals. I spent some time talking to some VDL families, and a theme that came across that I think, you know, we want to make sure we address, you know, we've touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to be a little bit more specific, is the technology component. Because I think if you've got a child at home on a Chromebook all day and there's a problem, whether it's the microphone or whether it's something in the classroom or a Wi-Fi issue, I think we need to figure out a way to get those problems addressed more quickly for the VDL kids. I mean, it's a problem for everybody, and we're not a Fortune 500 company. We're, you know, a school district. But I wonder if there's a way that we can expedite tech support issues for the VDL families, if there's a way that we can have rapid response surveys in place where we can get more feedback on tech issues that the VDL families are having. Because if we're losing that one-on-one time at the end of the day that we had in the early dismissal model, you know, I mean, teachers are going to be waiting for emails from parents basically to find out that something's not working. I don't know. So I just want to make sure we're thinking a little bit creatively about the tech issues. And if there's if there is a cost component that comes along with that, then, you know, I'd like to know what that is. Is there some kind of hurdle or challenge in the way of giving these kids better tech support for their learning? Let's understand it and address it and see what it is.
I did want to jump in, Melissa. I think you bring up a good point. It's obviously a balance with the tech department. As we know, we only have one technician per building. And so it's a hard balance between ensuring that the teacher's technology is up and running, as well as the student technology at their house is up and running. And it's also sometimes difficult to determine what the actual problem is, because there are times issues where it's not clear in the beginning that it could potentially be a home internet issue that's causing the problem. And we can't work on home wireless issues because it's a liability for us. And that's something we can only work on district equipment. And so I've been working with the tech department to identify these are the priorities, you know, and how do we handle them? And so what happens a lot is when the technicians are working on teacher laptop issues, obviously that's the most important, because if a teacher laptop is down, that takes everybody offline. So then it's, you know, myself, I jump in and I start calling parents, or the other two employees who are in central office with me, we start calling parents. But there are times where you are correct, it can become overwhelming, and it's very difficult for us to call everybody immediately, because rightfully so, it's an emergency for all of these families when they can't access anything from their house. It's just a matter of time and not enough people to handle influxes as they happen. But we are looking at how can we get more efficient with our response time.
Yeah, if I may, Melissa, that's a really tangible, clear question and issue you raise. And I think we know Dan DeVito well enough. He gave a long answer, but his heart is delivering for our students and families. You know, we already know that's the DeVito mode. So I want everyone listening to know that's a great, very specific area to look at, and we will take that in, and that would be an update area to look at. But we will look at that, and I even, you know, if there's some short-term solutions, but we'll take that one on. That's very clear, very definite, very specific. So we will take that one on.
Any other questions by other board members?
I had one more question. We haven't talked about the social emotional. I don't know if maybe it's happening like behind the scenes, but are you doing like lunch bunches for the VDL students, or what are the school psychologists and social workers doing for those students? Is there a separate plan? Are they on the same plan with this plan? What does that look like?
So our school psychologist and our school counselor are meeting with students as they either as if they have a counseling on an IEP or on a 504 plan, but also as needs come up. You know, if a student is feeling upset or struggling, our counselors meet with them as needed or set up several meetings. So that's ongoing, certainly as the same as it would be here in school. In addition, our teachers are continuing with the ruler program. We talk about the mood meter, we talk about meta moments. So we're continuing with that social emotional, that a lot of that takes place during morning meeting. And actually, Nicole and I and some of the teachers are in the process of putting together an assembly dealing exactly with school emotions and behaviors and pride and all of that. So yes, it's an ongoing social emotional for everybody is certainly at the top. We really want everybody feeling connected and feeling safe and feeling supported. So yes, all of that.
Do those lunch bunches for the kids that are home, for the VDL students?
I don't know whether we've done any lunch bunches for the students who are at home. I can reach out and I could ask our school counselors and my school psychologists and ask whether they do that. But I do know that they're meeting all the time with them.
Yeah, I'm looking for action lists that I know matter to the VDL parents. I think one thing I'm taking from this conversation is on technology. Let's review, and Dan said it, how can we do a bit more? I think right now might be a good pivot point because we are well staffed with school psychologists, counselors, all the rest. They are very, very busy, but this might be a good time. And I can talk with Patty and Laura and Tracy about, is this a time to do a little outreach, a little more direct outreach to VDL families, be it a survey or then some direct follow-up at this point to say, how can we be of support? Understanding the givens, understanding that you are remote, understanding you're not in the building. But this may be a time to take advantage of the staff we have, not in 2 days, but to do some very definite outreach through that whole group of K-5 VDL families.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
SEL issues. I mean, so I'm hearing that as an action step that I will follow up with the principals about, and there may be some role for the PTO here regarding lunch bunches for VDLs. I know in other districts, the PTOs have organized a bit around the VDLs, their equivalent, and there may be some help that those parents could provide. Not putting people all in one house, let me be clear, but remotely doing some things that would help the connections.
Bill, I think the outreach is a great idea, especially as you're kind of nailing down the specifics. I think that might be really helpful because it's. I think that some of the parents, it would be helpful for everyone for some of the parents to be heard. Not that they haven't been heard, but I think that it might help in solidifying some things as you kind of work out the nitty-gritty details of how the offering is going to work.
So will there be an opportunity to revisit some of these creative solutions in the monthly Board of Ed meeting? What's the forum where we can circle back and understand the progress around that? I don't want it to just end here. I want to continue the conversation.
I certainly think at the board meeting, we're going to have a conversation about where we are with everything, right? The link between the in-person for each school, the VDL offering, and, making those linkages and having having an agenda item on that. So there's an opportunity for some more discussion there. Bill,
Yeah, I think the monthly, and I think Taffy, from a curriculum committee standpoint, I think so much of this fits there. I think that what I've really valued about the way the Western Board works is it does a wonderful 1-2, to use a soccer term. One is that committee level discussion, and then you bring it to the full board. And I think this would be, my suggestion, if I may, is a standing item curriculum committee. I think that's the best place to be robust. And I think SEL's picked up within, for example, curriculum committee, the tech issues are picked up there, but that'd be there. And then definitely full board, have that 1-2 each month for you as a board to be discussing how are we doing with our, and focus it, our voluntary distance learning students. How are we doing? Are we making progress on any of these pieces?
Mhm.
The advantage of that too is that fits in your time structure, it fits in our time structure, because I'm very sensitive right now to where we're going and what's happening around us in terms of us needing to get moving on any modifications. So we have time to make the modifications work really, really well and cognizant of the larger public health environment we're in and upticks and trends, et cetera.
Yeah. Bill, this is ultimately your decision and decision of the principals, the administration, and so forth. And so, I think just as a board, we want to make sure that all the voices are being heard, and I think that kind of they kind of check in our committee meetings, in our full board meetings, in our task force meetings is going to be critical, right? Any other questions on this?
Ken, what do we have on the agenda for curriculum meeting this week to continue this discussion per Ruby's request?
Yes, we do have a placeholder where we can discuss this.
Ruby, join us.
Right. Okay. Any other questions on this before we move to some of the budget basics?
Tony, if I may just do a check-in. I appreciate you understanding it's a superintendent administration decision. I'm prepared to, make the decision and own the good and all the rest that comes with any of these decisions these days. I do know there's great anxiousness to have this decision made, have that clarity out to families and students, most important, but also our staff. My sense is, as much as the VDL parents, and they've been very forthright, I really value all of the comments that have come in. I'm not hearing strong support for option 3 for the larger issues that it raises, but we're somewhere around option 2 and option 1, and maximizing those for all the things we've talked about for our VDL students and families. I would like to, make a decision later today and have that out to families, and then be updating the board starting tomorrow on the things we're working on to maximize this decision, because it's so hinged, this decision, with the full return K-5 that I don't want to lose a day for our teachers to really deliver well for our students. So my thought is I will, after this meeting, meet quickly with Patty, Laura, and Ken. We would have a decision made and out today, clarifying a lot of the good points you as a board have raised, clarifying at least headline action steps on some of the SEL, the technology, other pieces. The synchronous chart here is very, very important for families. So I just want to check in on that, because if we wait more days, we're not helping people by waiting. We're not helping our staff. And at the end of the day, we're not helping our students, our VDL students. But I just want to check in on that approach if what I've just said is clear.
Yeah, it sounded like, I think it's clear to me. And I think it also should be clear, that we had a lot of feedback, a lot of questions, several concerns around the support structure around option 2. And so, Bill, I think it would be great if you kind of, I think, as you said, I think if you actually look, be a little bit, or be much more specific on some of the next steps, including outreach and so forth, on how we're going to address some of the support issues around option 2, that would be great.
Yeah, and at the risk of extending the conversation a bit, I mean, the team brought a lead recommendation of 2. Next in line was 1. They've listened here very carefully, I know, and some of the questions have been raised may lead to, is one actually better than two? And I just don't, again, at the risk of extending the conversation, if the decision is one instead of two, I don't know if there can be board members who go, well, wait a minute, where'd that come from? You know, I just, again, it's important that you know, that we're in sync on this.
Well, you know, I guess that's really a question for you and the principals. Yeah, if you're saying one versus two, you know, we should know that now. I mean, if you're going to come back in several hours and say, you know, we thought about it and we're going with one, you know, I think it's going to be a bit of a surprise. But so that's in the conversation. We should probably talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think two is the way to go. That's what I clearly heard earlier. But, you know, it's a group that listens, and there were some questions raised about one. Is one worth, is there some things there better than two? Again, it's a superintendent decision, but I want to be in sync with where the board discussion has been as much as possible. If the board's consensus is we've listened, we've looked at this, administration, you make the decision, but we agree with your lead recommendation is two. I just want to have some, if I may, I want to be really clear on that.
Yeah, I want to be very clear also in what we're putting out to the public and what we're having discussion on, and then having a knee jerk a few hours later. That's what happened last week, right? With the memo going out saying this is the recommendation, and then 24 hours later on the Board of Ed call, it was a completely different recommendation. So we've now just spent the past hour and a half talking about your recommended option of two. I think had we known that one was still in the running, I think our question, we would have had a different set of questions.
No, it's not still in the running, but I think there's been thoroughness around how option three will not work. Thoroughness then about two, you clearly are then saying, we hear you. We've had lots of really good questions. We agree, consensus, not a vote, but we agree that number two is the way to go. I'm just clarifying that. I mean, I think you've just clarified it, that your sense is that the lead recommendation from the administration of two is what, I mean, again, nothing's perfect here, but is the best of the three as you as a board see that at this point, is what I'm understanding from our discussion.
Yeah, and I would actually put it a different, you know, broadly speaking, you know, 1, 2, and 3 are really, you know, yes, I think that those are good artificially broad categories for us to be discussing really different options, right? I think what we're really saying is that, and what you're saying and what you're putting forward is a recommendation that we're going to have a full synchronous component with our full return in person for K-5, right? That's what you're saying. And so what I think what you've heard is everyone saying is, yeah, if that's the recommendation, that's fine. And for many reasons, that really is a paradigm that really works well for a lot of different situations. But what you're hearing is that there needs to be more specifics and more details around the support structure around that, whether it be technical, whether it be math, ELA, whether it be social emotional. As you develop the details around that, we also should be developing the details around the support structure that's going to go along with that. And so, you know, 1, 2, and 3 are really broad categories, but at the end of the day, ultimately, it's really some sort of a, you know, it's our verbalization of what you're recommending, and what we're saying is, yeah, that's great, but the devil is in the details, and the support part of this probably needs to be fleshed out a bit more.
And I would also add on to that, I think that page 4 of this document, where it talks about the characteristics of synchronous instruction and some of the details in there, are just as pertinent for our middle school families and our high school families. I know the purpose of today's discussion was to zero in on trying to get conclusions in place for K-5, but I do think there are some concerns coming out of I think primarily the middle school at this point, but you know, we do have a small percentage of high school students. I think that this information about how we're now going to this synchronous type of instruction on those at-home days for all of our students, it's critical to bubble this information up to our upper school families as well, and to incorporate, again, focusing on middle school, those support structures about the interventions that our students are having. By the time they reach the high school, it's a little more targeted about the services that students are getting. So I think there's a little more clarity, but I do think the work done to get us to this document is greatly appreciated. And I think it will benefit our upper families as well.
Yeah, Gina, I think that's really well said. And particularly that page you're flagging is an excellent creation for us to be using at all levels. It's, I think, clarifying for teachers as much as families. So I think I agree completely on that. And I was purposely a few minutes ago just circling back to check in. I've heard consensus around the recommendation. I just didn't want to come out of this meeting and then I just wanted to double check a few things. You've been very clear. You responded really well and very helpful with lots of particular details that we will work on going forward. But I think, again, in deference to the students, families, and the planning for them, we'll have a decision out with a lot of clarity on it as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's move on to another small topic, which is the budget. How do you want to handle this, Bill? Maybe give it.
Yeah, Phil's
gonna run with this.
Yep, Phil, you got it right.
Morning, everyone. Bill, do you want to lead off on the assumption just in a broader category, just to kind of frame it a little bit?
Sure, if you want me to do that. You have an assumptions document. I got to load it up here. Hold on. You're skipping over the calendar item.
Oh, that's right. That's the first one up. All right. Yeah. Let me jump on the calendar, Bill, while you search for the assumptions.
I've got assumptions. Let's just follow the agenda order.
Sure. Yeah. So jump into the calendar real quick. So I think everyone had a chance to review the initial calendar, and we met at our first meeting. We made I think 2 minor changes. The first time we removed the morning meeting, the January 7th morning meeting, the 9 to 11 meeting, and replaced that with a meeting on January 8th, also from 9 to 1. I think in terms of changes, that was the only significant change that was made to the calendar. Just want to reiterate that the dates begin in February onwards. Those dates are just for information purposes only. So can everyone hear me okay? Okay, that's just for informational purposes only, and those dates will be updated as soon as a calendar is available from the town. So that's just pretty much overall where we stand with the budget calendar, unless there's any other discussions or any other recommended changes.
The one thing that we probably add is and still to be determined is the date for a tri-board meeting. And so I think the Board of Finance in their last meeting agreed that it was good to have one. I think Steve was tasked with getting back to me and Chris and Jonathan Louise about a date. They want to do it, I think end of October. I'm trying to push it to early November. And I think that we are going to get together to discuss agenda probably in the next week or so. So that's just a date that probably needs to be added to that.
Maybe just footnote it, Phil, because I know we're supposed to vote on the calendar on Monday night. Just maybe put a footnote somewhere on the document that there's a tri-board meeting being developed, and that will be added at a future date, just so documents are clear.
I will do.
Thank you.
All right, Bill.
Are you ready to shift to the next item, Tony?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the budget assumptions document, Phil and I have worked on this the last several days. While the framework is similar to what you've had in the past, it does have some good clarity that Phil's bringing to it. So we still lead with number one. That's our 5 goal areas that are driving at our overarching outcome of developing global citizens. Under number 2, similar framework and structure there that we've used in the past, but it's more specific. If you go back to past documents, number 2 was actually quite redundant in the past from number 1. This is not redundant. This is now focused in on 3 critical strategic areas. The first 2 will be front and center as you look at the draft goals document over the next couple of weeks from both district-wide and each building. So for example, number 1, they're optimizing digital learning, et cetera, that will be present district-wide as a critical goal, both within academic excellence, but also healthy learning, and it will be picked up at each school in various languages and all the rest. So for example, Lisa's high school goals done pick up this idea. It may not be worded exactly this way, but it picks up this idea that we need to be very strong on digital learning. And while this is specific here to hybrid and full remote scenarios, which obviously is within a COVID-19 environment, the idea there is that we'd be looking beyond COVID-19 to take advantage of what we're learning. And here we specify an upgrading of selected digital resources. That's to say to you that we likely are going to have to be talking with the board in this budget season about staff laptops, just to put that specific piece to that Romanet. And then across this Romanet 2 is the idea of professional capacities. That came up a lot in our previous discussion on VDL. As good as our teachers are and our administrators, what more support can we give them to operate optimally in a digital learning environment? The second one speaks to a major concern of all of us, the board for sure, and the language here is one you're now going to see coming at least from the administration, and we can talk through goals and all the rest. And in this language is now going to be at each of the school goals as well as district-wide, but you can read it. But this is really looking at the issue of racism, inclusive communities, and all the rest, and being very specific here actually to the items you as a board have raised. Curriculum instruction, diversity of staff. You've also raised the issue of incident response. We don't have that here, but professional learning. As good as we are in these areas, and I really do think the teachers here, by and large, administrators are very, very good on these very important and challenging topics. Professional learning is essential. So that's here. Third is improving facilities. That's a continuation from last year. Roman numeral 1 and 2 are new. Roman numeral 3 is a continuation, but please note under Romanet 2, the addition there of the reference to the Town of Weston Facility Feasibility Committee, just so that make sure this document's saying that we'd be building a budget, paying attention, though they don't have decisions yet. I think it's important that you know that we're thinking about that. Cost containment remains an area, a big priority that continues from the past really several years. It's not necessarily an even trade with investments, but if we have an investment area, we'd look to see where from within can we pay for that. And we list here 3 areas. Under programs, we've kept that rolling, even if explicitly that optimization effort has not continued. It's important we recognize that a couple of years ago, we started down that path of how do we have, and we use the term optimization intentionally. You know, what's that best mix of academic programs to support students. You then have on page 2, the listing of enrollment actual as of October 1, and that relative to the projection from Malone and McBroom for 21-22. Now, let me be clear, they will be updating that at the November meeting. This is the projection from before. So as is the normal calendar, in November, they'll present to you the new projections carried forward. So again, it'll be multi-year, but they will need to update this. So you have here a preliminary look at what the enrollment projection is in that Malone-McBroom column. So we'll make it really clear that this was the initial from last year's analysis. You'll update that in the the budget documents when you have them based on the November report. And that report is to you as a board. Mike Zuba will present to you. You'll have plenty of time to engage with Mike Zuba directly about that enrollment projection. So I just want to make sure you're clear on that caveat.
Is there any reason to believe that those are pretty way off, those projections for 21, 22?
Yes.
It's too early to tell. And by the way, Zuba's on a 3-year run of almost nailing exactly what enrollment is.
Yeah, I think this will be a really interesting, an interesting set of projections to see how the last year and what we've seen in terms of migration patterns that are different because of COVID, and how Malone and McBroom is looking to see how that, how that progresses over the next several years. I think this is going to be an interesting one to see.
Yeah, Bill, I think your verbal explanation about this being preliminary and based on last year's enrollment projection is spot on. I would kind of like to see some of that verbiage built into this document, because if somebody picks up this document to read, none of what you said, which is very valid information, is relayed in the write-up about number 3. And I also think, as we've talked about trying to get a handle on that 70 student variance we had in our enrollment from August to October, I think we do have families who have opted for private school that may be coming back. And I realize there may be challenges in trying to get that information, but I think we just need to be specific in this document that this is very preliminary based on last year's projection. New projections will be coming out, and being honest that we have some wild cards going on right now with trying to do enrollment projections.
Right.
Yeah, so Phil, I think we should make sure we asterisk and footnote that column here in this chart and have the briefer than I just said, but to the point. The other thing, I do want to talk to Zuba, if I may use last name, because this issue of families making decisions the last minute, that's happened in other districts around it, be it to homeschooling, independent school, or whatever. He may have some good ideas on how we can figure that one out.
Yep.
Because we're not alone in that, as you've probably heard from your colleagues and friends in other towns. That I agree. That's a critical asterisk.
That is a critical, because you are basically, it seems, and I think that along the same lines as Gina's comment, is that at some point this budget is a post-COVID budget, right? Meaning it's there's going to be enrollment issues that are going to be known and some unknowns that we're going to have to, get some input from Mike Zuba and others. But also this assumes it's built off of the starting point. And once we go to the pro forma, you'll see the starting point is last year's budget, which is a pre-COVID budget. This budget is going to assume that we're going to be back to normal in that year. And if it isn't, we should put that in.
I asked the question last month. I don't know if you have an answer to it now. Is the 70 students that were in InfoSnap, when you're in InfoSnap, is the due diligence done to verify your address? So are those 70 students in Weston?
Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't be putting them in without that verification. There's a process going on, but so we need to come back and look at the whole question of this year. Was that InfoSnap part of what was misleading, because families were starting the process, then shifted. So we have to look at that entire area, entire issue.
Yeah.
Do you look at it ever as a range? I mean, given the circumstances?
A range meaning that of what's likely to flow out of InfoSnap into be actual.
Yeah.
We haven't in the past. This is a year where it was the most fungible, but that might be something else to look at. We could ask, perspective here helps. I mean, Mike Zuba might have some good ideas on kind of how you count that and track it. There may be, a different way to do it. This is the year where it was most significant in terms of did it materialize.
So the other thing, before I forget, one more thing is, and I haven't read this document to the end, but Phil, have we included our assumption around healthcare cost increases in the document?
It is not particularly in this document, but it's on the proforma.
Yeah, you might want to include our assumption about healthcare costs as well. Our
Sure.
assumption, yeah.
And again, I think we want to make sure we get you to talk about the pro forma here. On page 3, we list the employee contracts under number 4. The WA, WT, and AFSCME, those were already negotiated. That's what Phil's listed for the upcoming year. Roman numeral 4, that is written to give the board lots of room to make decisions. It's purposely written as recommended, what typically happens, and just the basis of how the budget is built. But not, let me just say, Roman numeral 4 is not committing you as a board to those decisions, but just you have to build the budget based on some tentative number, and it's explaining how that's built. But that was very carefully reviewed, so you as a board have plenty of room to do something differently there if you want. So I hope that's clear. And again, maybe later you could let us know if some other language would be helpful. And then
I think that makes sense. And I think that maybe just tweaking the description of 4 just to say include costs associated with employees, and then have your contract terms, and then just throw another sub point in there for an estimate for healthcare costs, Phil. Like that would be a natural place for it.
Yep.
Okay. And then I think the rest of these are fairly straightforward, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to come back to number 8 in a second, 9 and 10. If you go back to study past documents, in this list, 5 through 10, we used to have professional development here, but given what we say up under the strategic investments, it felt quite redundant. So I brought it up inside, and Phil agreed. It's in a sense, emphasize even more how important professional learning is, as opposed to just, it was kind of in the list. Number 8 is language that's very carefully written to make sure as a board, we're paying full attention to a high quality PPS and special ed program, but it's very carefully written. And so later, if you have questions, we could talk about those, but that's a critical area. And anytime in a budget document, as you've heard, Tracy would say this clearly to you, that you got to be really cautious how you talk about PPS and SPED in a budget document. And this I think is very well struck language. I did not write it, so I'm not taking credit for it. But it's, I think, very, very important language, and I believe well written. And it's exactly what you had in this document last year. So I don't know if there are more questions, but I know you want to talk about the pro forma. Is that correct, Phil?
That's correct. But before we jump to the pro forma, Gina, on item 4, you had mentioned including a note here about health insurance.
Basically, just since that's kind of like our employee cost section.
Okay.
You have items 1, 2, 3, and 4. That'd be, number 5 would be, estimate increase in healthcare costs.
Understood.
It just seems to make sense to include all the employee costs in the same section.
Understood. Absolutely. All right. So jump into the pro forma. So I just want
to Phil, before you go through the pro forma, can you give a definition of what pro forma means in this case?
So
once we agree upon it.
Yeah, right. And I think I'm going to kind of just preface this just as we go. So this just not necessarily truly what it is in terms of a definition, but truly what we are hoping to highlight here when we present this. So what we're hoping to highlight is truly the costs that we have, are all the, I don't want to say the core costs, but all the current costs, let's call it the challenges that we have to deal with going forward, before we start digging into the overall budget and all the ups and downs and everything else, right? I mean, as we've spoken about on many occasions, our main cost drivers here really is that 80% as it relates to salaries and benefits and a few other contractual obligations that we have. So when we present this pro forma, is really just to highlight those costs, which we know based on contract, not saying what is constant and what cannot be changed, but it's based on our current levels, or based on what we have as a budget for FY21. If we should roll those based on the same assumptions, because there's a lot that will change between now and when we present the formal budget in January. So that's pretty much what we were hoping to present as we did the performance. It is not our budget increase. It is not our budget. This is just so for the board just to understand, and just for the general public to understand the various items or the various issues that we truly need to focus on and really find a solution if needed, as we tie that into our overall strategic goals and objective as we come with our formal budget in December. So that's pretty much.
So Phil, what I'm hearing is that we basically took we kind of took where we are. We basically said, okay, we'll keep everything the same. We'll just embed we'll embed the contractual increases. We'll also, the cost increases that we know are coming, we'll put that in to give us sort of an area of, if we did nothing but just absorb what we know is coming, this is what it would look like.
That is correct. That is correct. And things are constantly changing, as we saw just with this COVID environment. So you had mentioned, Tony, at the onset that, whether or not the budget that we will present for FY22, if that's going to be a COVID budget or if it's just going to be a normal year. Truly at this point, it is difficult to say if it's going to be a normal budget or if it's going to be a COVID budget, because things are truly unsettled. We really don't know how things are going to progress between now and even December and even beyond December.
Right.
But what we know, and what I can say right now, it is going to be a hybrid. Because for example, if we look into software, there's certain software that were newly implemented for FY20, which were not considered when the budget was formally presented. And those were primarily attributed to COVID, or just to the new way how we're delivering instruction. There may be a need to continue with some of those software items, for example, that were not thought of last year. And as Bill mentioned initially, we know that we're going to have to deal with at some point. And let's have a broad discussion as to what the commitment is in terms of technology and what those costs will be with regards to COVID or not.
Look, Phil, the point you just made has been, another example of my concerns about the town of Weston and its budget process. That in the past, it's typically been viewed that the Board of Ed budget is done by the end of January, with work that basically you guys complete by the end of December. It's very premature to lock in a number that early, particularly in a year like this, where between January and the end of April, which is when the budget typically goes to the ATBM, we could have a lot more concrete data about what we're looking at for next year. So Tony, I guess this is to you. I'm hoping when we have the tri-board meeting, maybe if we can have some agreement, with the other boards that yes, the Board of Ed is going to do its work in January. But we really truly want there to be a collaborative process going forward and a recognition that our budget could change between what we work with in January as we move forward, because there could be some very specific changes to the budget that could be material based on what happens with COVID.
Yeah, I think at the Board of Finance meeting, if people listened in last week, one of the things that a number of the board members said was, there's so much we don't know yet, right? And so I think there is a recognition that it's very hard to kind of figure out exactly where we're going to be until we get a little further down in the process. Yeah, I agree.
May I make a suggestion? And that's a really powerful point, Gina. And the assumptions document, and this is now my phrasing, historically I viewed under me as a little bit of milquetoast. Okay, there it is. Do we really pay attention? So Phil got me to really say, let's make this really solid. I would suggest the following. I think that the assumptions document up top should tie to the calendar and say, we're building this budget through the calendar. And I think there, Gene, is a natural place under that to say some language as to what you're saying. So the assumptions, I mean, make your assumptions document with us as administration that much stronger to say, we understand the calendar and here's a big caveat that we're all operating with. Because then coming out of this process, you can point to the calendar, you can point to the assumptions document in that regard. That's up to you, but it's a way not to lose that critical point, because otherwise it doesn't sit anywhere in a document for, right? And we can make it really tight if I'm being clear.
I would be on board with that because, just transparency and, if somebody didn't watch this meeting and they pick up a document and read it, trying to gain information, I just feel that's a critical challenge this year that we're going to be facing. The fact that, our administration is building a budget between now and essentially the end of December.
Right.
By May, when the townspeople are voting on a budget, we may, knock on wood, hopefully be in a much better situation, different parameters in place. And I think we need to be upfront about the need to be collaborative, moving, through the February, March, April timeframe, and the potential to possibly, adjust our budget.
Yeah, and I think those are the types of things that are going to be appropriate discussion items for the tri-board meeting. I think these are the kinds of things that we should basically be saying all to each other up front so that we are, all on the same page in terms of how the budget gets built, the evolution of the budget, how the town is looking at the budget process. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Gina, for bringing that up. Because just with the past budget year, there's always changes, there's always shift. For the last budget cycle, it was difficult. Well, I felt a little bit difficult. There was a challenge for me to bring forth any additional costs that came up, because we were at a point where the only thing that I hate to say this, but we were just cutting to get to a target level. And it made it very difficult just with our entire process to bring forth new costs that came up. And because the idea that's there is that you have to absorb that in whatever it is that was initially presented. And that for me was a little bit challenging. So I'm happy that we're going to have this discussion moving forward. And I hope we can make those changes. And just to remind everyone, we're always mindful of the cost, and we're always mindful of just how we spend resources and how resources are allocated to us. So we're always mindful of that. However, when you start your budget process in December, you present a budget process in December, and it goes all the way through May, there's a lot of shifts, up or down, and everyone just have to be mindful that there will be maybe changes, and we just have to be open to whatever those changes are. Of course, done in a very.
It didn't help that you walked through the door right in the middle of the process either.
No, it did not. So again, that's pretty much where we are. Just in general, as you said, Tony, we pretty much.
Yeah, there's also one other thing that I don't know if the Board of Finance is. I'm assuming they're grappling with this. Is going to have a boomerang effect because they artificially reduced the mill rate. And so you got to remember, for us, there's another % or so boomeranging back to the town that they're going to have to deal with. So that's going to be, that's going to come home to roost too.
So, hey, Phil, just put on upcoming FinCom agenda, this whole idea that you just triggered in my mind about like specific COVID related costs. Maybe let's have a conversation about how we present maybe at high level, like maybe like this is the budget. If we're in COVID, this is an added expense. Let's talk about how we track COVID implications within the budget. Let's put that on November FinCom if we can, just to flush that out. Thank you.
And Tony, to your point, yes, that did come up briefly at the Board of Finance meeting last Thursday. And as you mentioned, that it's a good segue for us. What we did is that our budget was artificially reduced for FY21 because we shifted a recurring cost, to a non-recurring source of revenue, and that had to do with our dental claims.
Mhm.
So we're looking out the gate, if we should shift that back to the operating budget, roughly of a 0.8% increase.
Yeah.
So it's all these shifts that we make, and again, just to get us to a percentage increase or whatever it is that we always have to be mindful of as we shift year to year.
Yeah.
Um,
There's consequences to kicking can down the road. Always.
Absolutely, and sometimes it can be extremely painful, but it's just the ultimate effect of kicking that can down the road. So just to just go over the pro forma real quick, or just some of the assumptions that we've made. Again, so as much as we have hired, our staffing levels are still somewhat not settled. So at this point, I based the pro forma based on what the approved FTE for FY21. It's going to take another month or so, I believe, once we get through what ultimately our format is going to be to determine what the true staffing level is. And there's also going to be further discussion as we go on as to whether or not there should be any change, or if there's a need for any change in staff it. So this number here, for example, for the WTA contract, is really just a roll off our current FTE.
Mhm.
Everything here is tied directly to a contract, both for the WTA for law and for ASME. And there's a slight placeholder here based on what we mentioned in the assumptions, just for the unaffiliated staff. Health insurance and just benefits overall.
So what you're saying here is if we had any significant post-budget hires, they're not reflected here.
They're currently not reflected.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Because last year that skewed the budget to budget number, because we had a midstream 7 hires that skewed the numbers a little bit. People started scratching their heads a little.
Right. So I just want to flag that at the onset. So again, this is not the budget. I just want to keep reminding everyone that this is not the budget, because it can be a little bit scary. So with the plan based on our current, I started a conversation with our health insurance consultant yesterday, just to start exploring options outside of the state partnership plan. Of course, we do have language in our budget, within the contracts, specific language that may or may not allow us to move from the state partnership plan, but we at least started that conversation. What we did in terms of the census, we kept the census flat based on our September enrollment. And we pretty much just assumed an 8% increase, which would include the Fairfield County surcharge, so to speak. So we assume that is, at this point, we're looking at an 8% increase for health insurance.
Now, last year, it came out to what, 5.5% after everything was said?
6.75.
6.75. Okay.
Correct. So we're assuming 8. We at this point, we don't think it's necessarily going to be any higher, but you can never know. We won't have a sense of this until really, again, going back to when we would know stuff, not until March or April, when those rates are determined by the state controller's office. So once again, it's just some of those costs that will come well after what it is. So this is being very conservative at this point. These are just a Medicare and we spoke about the dental and that potential shift from the internal services fund to the operating fund. Based on our current budget and the projection through the end of the year, if claims come in at budget, we will end the fiscal year 21 with just over $700,000 in internal services fund. So I'm not quite sure what direction we will head into if we want to make that shift again, but all these items will be discussed as we get into a budget discussion next calendar year, that is.
Phil, so are you shopping those? You said you spoke with your consultant.
At this point, it's just an initial discussion. We're just exploring all options available. Last year, you'll recall that he presented to us, there were 2 options that we looked into. We looked into a group kind of a partisan block, and that the partisan block at that time wasn't significantly less than where the state partnership ultimately ended. Another option that was presented last year was the hybrid approach to the self-insured plan, which we'll also consider going into for this year as well. So we're looking into options right now, but we have nothing set.
Okay, only because I remember this coming up at the Board of Finance.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. So all the other costs here pretty much are just a standard increases that tied into not contracts, paid the state partnership plan are just based on their contractual increases year over year. We have reductions, and we do anticipate, well, there will be reductions to our early retirement incentive costs for roughly $47,000. At our last FinCom meeting, we did have a brief discussion of a potential increase to the legal costs for directly related to SPED. I just wanted to flag that right for the proforma that there'll be an increase of roughly $70,000 to get us more in line as to how the year-over-year trend has been. We do have other contractual increases which are set. We have a contract increase for our cleaning contract increasing for the Xenon plan. This is just for the management service of the Xenon plan. And we have contractual increases for first student, and we have also factored in a 10% increase, give or take, roughly for software increase. So if we did nothing at all and all else remained constant, we will be looking at a 4.13 year-over-year % increase to our budget.
Phil, is this, you're also assuming for SPED out of placement tuition and SPED transportation that you're just rolling that as the same budget number?
Correct. And the reason why I did not make any changes in that, because right now SPED, there's a lot going on in SPED, and at this point it is too early to determine where things are going to be. So I didn't want to put forward anything hard. So we just assumed that the SPED numbers as they are for FY21 will continue to be the same cost for FY22.
On that, the bus contract is the same? Just even the regular busing? I don't see that.
The bus contract, I'm sorry, it's under other increases. So it's pretty much almost the last line of the contract.
Oh, okay. So
right.
there is an increase.
So there is an increase factored into the first student contract. There's a 5-year contract, so there will be an increase on an annual basis. I did start initial conversations. Just want to put out there also, initial conversation is about if it is possible at all to optimize our transportation and our fleet, and if there's a better way, a more efficient way of providing services. The initial answer is no, just because of how the district itself is geographically situated. But we've started that discussion this year for student. They brought the route in-house. They were doing it last year, but they're using their own software, so they have more flexibility and they're versed in their software, and if there's any ways for us to optimize how we deliver transportation or provide transportation, we'll definitely have a better sense of that later in the year. So those are pretty much, there's some other items that we're definitely considering may come at additional costs. And this is really all in the intent to contain cost and just to provide a better service to the district. So that's pretty much where we are, just to start. We've just started the budget phase. We haven't gone in any detailed conversation or discussion with administration. So this is just pretty much where we are, guys. If we did nothing at all and all things remain in constant, we're looking at a 4.13% increase.
So Phil and everybody, I mean, we've just spent an inordinate amount of time talking about models and frameworks for, coming back into school. I'm trying to bridge that to this next cycle budgeting and to see how we can avoid as much as possible as this becoming a line item exercise. And, since 80% plus of our costs are people, and these are just thoughts, think of ways to think about those levers, right? And I think the four areas that come to mind is that we wanted to dive on the substitute model. I think that's something that came up in previous discussions. I think it'd be useful to be able to dimensionalize in one way or another, the implications of SPED, because really it's sort of it's something that itself, but it's just to give everybody understanding. So we're not trying to explain those over and over there. I think an overall HR model of, how are we approaching staffing in general, just to understand. And I added the fourth one, which is IT, because, post-COVID, as you said, Phil, there's probably going to be things in IT that are going to result in a continuance, whether it's COVID or non-COVID. So I'm just trying to brainstorm on ways that we can take the discussion to another level. And to me, those are 4 areas that I'd hope to have some robust discussion around.
Victor, if you could, that line item regarding SPED, you broke up a little bit. Can you just repeat that, please?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I saw that it said unstable here. Just some way to dimensionalize our SPED needs, right? Because it's a line item that is driven by a requirement, and I think we just need a way to explain that line item, being respectful of all the restrictions, but so that everybody understands, what we're doing in that area, right? So.
Thank you. So, and again, so tied into that, Victor, is a proforma, right? And we have to kind of tie what our model is, not whether for FY22 and going forward, and really what our strategic goals are, in any new initiative that the board will implement for future years. So we're sort of kind of going to present that in I think ideally we'll look at a 2-year proforma, which will we'll have 3 years. We'll have our new year budget and 2 future years in the form of a pro forma. And then that will help us to frame our discussions and help us to really just define or just to point out directly what direction we're going and what the cost will be going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Also tying, Victor, everything that you said, just to kind of to give more clarity into all these various items, because these are the items that do come up on an annual basis, the subs, the SPED and the IT costs, and then so that everyone truly understand the costs that are involved in that, and also the reasons why these costs are there. All right, that's pretty much an overview as to what we're looking at. Not sure if we have any other questions or any other further discussions.
No, I think this is a start. This is where we start, right?
So where we start. I can tell that Tony is very excited and he can't wait just to dive into this, and looking forward to all the meetings that we'll have and all the lengthy discussions that we'll have.
As a board, we haven't had enough excitement. I think we're all looking forward to this.
Numbers are fun.
FinCom's rapidly turning into the new policy where all the fun happens.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. No, I do think, Victor's point, and any organization that's driven, where the financials are driven by human resources, is always a very tricky budget, right? Because of the fact that you ultimately have to really, really make a good link between your outcomes and what it costs to produce those outcomes, when 80% of it is human capital, right? And it's making decisions around that is always very, very tricky. And we're just, every year we get closer and closer to that being the major decision, because there's no other, talking about levers, there isn't that many more levers to push or pull or eliminate, because anything we do to avoid the conversation just comes back to roost in years later, right? And that's, that's why this year, last year, and going forward is going to be tricky. But that's, I think, Victor, that's really the the nature of this budget right now, which is very, very highly influenced by the level of human capital that we have, which is the you know, the heart and soul of this district, right? Any other questions before we adjourn? Well, thanks again, everyone. I think we had two very good major discussions today. And like everything else, there's more to come. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Great. Second? Yep. Thanks, Gina. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.